So, hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are around the world. In today's Visual Builder office hours, we're going to talk about the new features in Visual Builder version 22.10. This is the version that we're rolling out this month. With me today are also Laura and Murtaza, who are going to monitor the Q&A session. So if at any point during the session you have a question, feel free to post it in the Q&A and they'll be able to help. We can also cover some of the questions at the end of the seminar. And we do these seminars every month. Every month we have a new topic, and this time we're going to talk about the new features in our release. All right, so we're doing a release that is basically have already started. So some of you might already have the new version out. Some of you are going to get it along the way during this month. We're rolling this to Visual Builder Studio already in some of the areas. It's been released over the weekend. Some of the other areas, North America, for example, are supposed to get it later on today. So probably tomorrow when you come to the office, it would be there. If you're using Oracle Integration Cloud and you're using Visual Builder from their window 1 for update has already started. So again, they are doing updates in waves. So they are starting to update instances basically today and tomorrow. And then the second wave would be later on. And if you're using Visual Builder Standalone, towards the end of the month, you'll be getting the update over there as well as part of window 1 and 2 weeks after that in window 2. So we wanted to do the seminar today to kind of prepare you, because some of you are already going to get those features today and tomorrow. Some of you might take a little bit more time to get those. So like with any release of Visual Builder, you're going to get a new version of JET that you can use. This is version 12.1.4. This version doesn't have a lot of new features compared to 12 that we had before. It has some bug fixes and performance enhancement in there, so it's always good to update those. You're also going to get a new version of the Visual Builder runtime libraries, again with new functionality in there. And just like with every release, we are not automatically updating your client runtime libraries. If you want to get those new functionalities, you go into your application settings, there's a little update button, and you can click the update and we would automatically update your application to pick up the new version of the JET and Visual Builder runtime. One thing to note is that we want to keep you up to date and keep your application using the latest libraries, so any performance or bug fixes or even security fixes that we introduce are applied to your application. Therefore, we only support the current version and the two oldest versions below that, so basically 3 versions that we support. If you're using a version that is too old, you're going to get a screen that looks like this when you open Visual Builder and you open your application in the design time. And we're going to kind of force you to update because there's an upgrade button up there. You can still, by the way, access the code of your application directly, but you don't get the visual editor, so it's no fun. And we want you to keep up to date on your libraries. So if you're using versions that are before 22.04, this would kind of force you to update to the newest version. I would remind something that I remind every time: if you are still using the old Oracle SAS look and feel, you would need to pick up a new version of the theme as well if you're going to upgrade your runtime, so it would look proper. Otherwise, we recommend that you'll be using Redwood-based templates since this is the new UI standard. Let's talk about some of the new features that you're going to see in this version. So the first feature has to do with declarative access to the security setting for your application, pages, flows, etc. So this is aimed at situation where you want to protect sections of your applications or the whole application and only allow specific user roles to access those parts of the application. Now, you were able to do it before, but before that, you had to do things at the JSON level. You had to go in and modify stuff. Now we actually expose it in a very easy to access way as part of the settings for your application, flow, or page. You basically define roles in your application, and then you can dictate which role can access which part of your application. So let me show you how these things look like. I'll go over to our application over here. I'll just do a quick preview of the application as it is right now. Right now, it doesn't have any security roles defined in it. So when you access the application, every user that accesses the application would be able to go in and go to each part of the application, whether it's the department page, the stats page, and see the information in each one of those. Okay. What you can then do for an application is you can go in and you can edit the settings of the application. Make this window a little bigger. And in the application setting, you can add user roles. So those are roles that are for this application. So for example, we can have a manager role. Okay, so those are people who are going to get access to everything in the application. And maybe we have another role that is called employee role. Okay, and those are only going to get access to some parts of the application. Now, those roles are defined inside the Visual Builder application. You then need to assign specific users and roles or groups from your Identity Cloud service to match to those. Okay, so you can do that over here. For now, I'm not going to define mapping. I'm just going to use these roles in my application. So now in each one of our layers, so for example, in the application, if you go into settings and security, you would now see a place where you can specify roles that are allowed to access this application. You can also specify whether this application requires authentication or not. So this is to allow, for example, situations where you want anonymous access to your application. For example, maybe you want to create a user interface that is exposed to everyone on the web to give you some information, update some data, then you can create an application that doesn't require authentication at all. So this setting is not just at the application level, it's also at the specific flows level. So for example, I can go to the stats flow, go to the settings and security, and I can say that for the stats, only managers are able to access that area. Okay. I can also do this at the page level. So for example, I can click on the employee edit page, okay, and I can set the security over here to say also only managers are allowed to update that page. So if we're doing something like that, and then we go back to our application, you can set the role during testing of the application over here from this little icon over here. So for example, if I'll run my application again as an employee this time, okay, and I'll do a preview, and I can either do a preview by clicking run, or I can actually do it, of course, in the live mode. You would see now that if I expand this and I try to go to the stats, nothing happens. So I can't navigate to the stats area. If I click on department, I should still be able to go there. Similarly, I can pick an employee, but when I click edit, nothing happens. And this is because I'm in the employee role. If I switch my association to be a manager, okay, and I'll do a preview now, everything would be accessible for me. Okay. So now if I go over here and I go to stats, I should still be able to see the stats. If I go to employees and I click on an employee, I'll be able to go and edit the details of the employee. So this allows you again to define security in terms of who is allowed to access what part of my application. And now, of course, the other thing you can do is you can hide things. So for example, you can hide the edit button based on role. All you need to do is basically go over to here and surround this button with an if condition. And the if condition can be dependent on the specific role that the user has. Okay, so we have a bunch of system variables that allow you to access the roles of the users. Okay, so you can condition based on the role and whether the user has a specific role. So this is how you would hide the actual menu items or button or things like that. All of this is, of course, in our documentation, but this new functionality at the page level, flow level, and application level to define specific roles is now a lot easier to use and protect your application. One thing that I would mention here is that this protection is done on the client side, and anything that is done on the client side with the right amount of hacking knowledge might be something that someone would be able to hack around. So it's not enough to just protect this in that way. You should also make sure that your backend, your REST services don't allow fetching data or updating data or doing any operation based on the roles. So of course, we have those roles defined in, for example, you can use them in our business object. You can pass them when you're calling REST backends and make sure that the REST layer that you're using doesn't allow unauthorized people to do specific operations. The other thing that we did is we improved some of the things that you can do with fragments in terms of the development experience. We added a fragment usage information, and we added the ability to easily go and edit a fragment when you're on a page. So let me show you that functionality in Visual Builder. So we'll go back to the same application, and we have a little functionality over here where when you click on the image of an employee, you can update the employee picture. Okay. So this is a little pop-up that shows up. Now, if you switch to design mode and you go over here, when you hover over this area, you now see this whole area is basically something that you can edit. And if you click to edit this one, so if I click this one, you would actually see in the structure pane, this is a fragment container. Okay. And if I just want to edit it, I just click over here on this little pencil icon, and I'll be taken into the fragment itself to update the information about the fragment. Now, one of the things you see now on the fragment is which pages are using this fragment. So this is, again, a useful thing to know a change impact. So in terms of any change that I'm going to do to this fragment is not just for that page that I was on, it's also going to show up in another page where this is being used. And of course, I can then just go over here and update something like switch photo, and this would update things in the page I was in. So if I go back to my fragment and back to the page that was using me, and again, this is a nice navigation trick. I can click on stuff from the usage and go directly there. Now my fragment says switch photo. Okay. So again, the new thing is the little icon over here that takes you over here to the editing of this area and the ability to navigate from one fragment to the specific pages that are using it. So if I go over here now, this is the same fragment. And again, we show the change that we did here. So this is, again, some usability and development-oriented features that we added to the tool. Another thing that you might have noticed is that in our design time, the component palette has been reorganized and changed a little bit in terms of the layout. We now allow you to have a collapsed view of the components. We also allow you to see grid view and list view of the components, and you have control over how those things are set. The other thing that we added is something called InputParameter Indicator, and this is very useful for cases where you're working in the design mode with a page that requires input parameters, and it shows you that those might be missing if you didn't pass it correctly. So I'll show you the classic example, which is if I was working on the employee start page. I'll close this thing now. Okay. There's the ability to go and edit the employee, and the employee is done in the edit page. So if I open the edit page in my page designer, okay, one thing that I just navigated here from the other page. So let me do this. I'll close this and I open the page from here. Okay, I have the parameter checked over there. So let me do this. Deselect the employee, do a refresh. Hopefully it would show. Like, the problem is I can't get the arrow right now, but I'm going to try and get the arrow in any case. No. All right, maybe if I go over here. No, okay. Maybe I have a default value for that variable. In any case, there's this little input parameter here, okay? And if I clear this one, okay, this is what you might have gotten if there wasn't a value in that parameter. Okay, which is you start the page in design mode and you see an error and no data is being fetched. And until now, you might not have been sure why didn't you get information, why did you get an error, and you might have needed to start investigating this. But now we have this little very useful missing required input parameter message up here that shows up, and then you can know that you need to go over here and actually set the parameter. So this would be very useful. Again, if you start a page in design mode, you see, hey, I need to provide a parameter. Go over here, you put in a value for the parameter, and then the page behave much more the way that you would have wanted it to be. The other thing is, again, the component palette over here. You can see this is the collapsed view. I can then expand each area. And one of the reasons we're doing this is that more and more components are being added to the component exchange with every version of Jet. You're also going to start to get all our Redwood components very soon. So all of those type of things are going to make this area with a lot more components in it. So you have actually control over whether you want to have everything expanded or just have everything collapsed. Okay, so it kind of depends on your preferences. Also, inside the areas, you can decide that you want to see things as a grid. So it requires a little less space, but it's organized this way. Okay, or if you want to see it as a list. And of course, remember that always if you're looking for a specific component, probably the fastest way is just to start to type at the top, and you would find the component that you're after. So again, all of those are things that from us watching and doing usability studies with our developers inside Oracle are things that we found out that would be useful to help them work with the tool a little better. We also did a few enhancements in the business object area. One of the things that we changed is how relationship between objects are being represented. So association between various business objects are now represented as a field also inside the field mapping over here. Okay. The other enhancement to business object is in cases where you're basing your application on a database, on an existing database, and you're creating business object on existing tables, we now have a little refresh button that allows you to click it and get updates to the refresh, to the schema that you're using, get the refreshed list of tables, views, and things like that. Up until now, we had situations where people basically pulled out the first list of tables, and then when someone added a table, they couldn't get the new name because we cached it to save network traffic. And the last thing is that you now have a source tab or view for your business object, which is very useful, again, if you're working with Git and you want to do version management of things and you want to see the changes. And now it's a visual way basically to see changes in business objects. So again, to show you some of those things, I'm going to create quickly a new application. Actually, I have a new application over here. Is this a new application? Yeah. Okay. So this application is set, if you go into the settings, the business object over here are mapped to use an existing schema in an Oracle database. And again, hopefully you all know that a couple of releases ago, we added this ability to point to an existing database and then create business objects on top of those tables in this database. Okay. So when you create a new business object, what we actually do here is we're going to go over and show you the list of tables in this schema in the database, and then you can pick up a table and define it in your application. Okay. So as you can see, we now have a little refresh button over here that allows you to get the new list of tables. Up until now, this wasn't there. So once we fetch this list, this is what you're going to see throughout your session. But now if you need to get a new list of what's new in the database, just hit this button. You can see there's a new query being done over here, and we get the new list of tables that is available to us. So this is when you're working on existing schemas in a database. To go back to this demo, I'm going to show you the relationship option of defining relations between objects. So for example, when you're in the employee, if you want to add a mapping to a location, so add a new field that maps there, you can add a new field. We'll call this one a city, which is a related field to the location table and to the city over there. So this creates this field over here, which is the city code. But the other thing that you see here is you see this city object, which is actually the accessor. Similarly, you see here the department name and the department accessor. And this is actually, again, a way for you to see the relationship between the field and the table and the other table. Okay, so now you have department to employees over here, and you have locations and employees. You can then define whether this accessor is enabled, how to handle delete cases. So for example, if I delete a location, whether I delete all the employees in that location, things like that. So this is a new way to see this. Up until now, it was only available for you over here in this area. The other thing we added here is we actually show you the name of the accessor, which is very useful, again, in situation where you need to write some Groovy script in your application and access one object from the other or reference one object from the other. You do this with the accessor over here. And the last point here is that we have this new source tab over here. And the source tab basically shows you the information about your business object and the relationships that it has with other business object over here. So if you were to change anything declaratively, okay, if I were to remove, for example, this relationship, okay, this would end up as a change in the code over here. And then it's easier to see the changes this way when you're doing, for example, merge request in Visual Builder Studio, handling it at the Git level, also easier to then resolve conflict. So this is the new source view for your business objects. One more thing that we added to business object is a monitoring of the consumption of business object inside our database. So as you know, the Oracle Visual Builder comes with a built-in database that has a licensing limit of 5 GB on the size of data that you can keep in it. Now, frankly, 5 GB is quite a lot for a lot of the use cases. Remember that all you can keep in it is just text-based information. So it's usually quite enough. If you need more, you can always switch to your own database. But one of the things people complained about is they didn't know how much they were using. They didn't know which applications were using how much, and now you have a way to see it. So in your instance settings, you'll have this type of screenshot where it would show you the amount of database usage you have out of the amount that is allocated to you. And you would also get a breakdown of the specific applications and how much they use in development and in runtime. Okay? And so I have my situation over here is that this instance is actually not using the built-in database, but rather using an external database. Okay, so only part of the functionality is going to be available there. But you can see if I go to the tenant database, this is using an external database. It's not using the built-in one inside Visual Builder. I can still do this retrieve database usage. We do a query on the database, and then we can show you from the applications that are running in your instance, how much memory or how much storage actually each one of them is using. Okay. So in development, the Cookbook is occupying about 2 MB. At runtime, I only have a sample application here that is called EMPS1 that has about 600K of usage. So this is, as you can see, I have a lot more room to grow over here towards my 5 GB. Now, again, usually you would see here a chart that shows you the usage. Because I'm using an external database, we don't show this chart because we don't have the privileges to access that data. But if you are using the built-in database, it would show up there. So again, this is part of what you see now in the database, in the Visual Builder instance settings. And we did a few enhancements to the dynamic components. The dynamic components are distributed as part of Oracle Jet. Oracle Jet has switched to a new architecture for the components. It's a VDOM-based implementation. The big advantage for you would be that the components are much faster now. They have a new prefix, OJDyn, which is how you distinguish them from the older version of the dynamic components. So from now on, whenever you drag a component, a dynamic component from the component palette into your page, we're going to use those new dynamic components with the new implementation. If you have existing components, dynamic components in your application, they would still behave and work as before. You can always switch them if you want to the new dynamic components. We also enhance some of the capabilities there. One of the things is that when you create a dynamic component and you want different fields to have different templates, you can now do this in dynamic components. And we can also allow you to sort tables with a virtual field that you defined as a dynamic field for your table. I think this is the last thing I'm going to talk about. No, it's not the last, it's almost the last. And that's new capabilities in the Visual Builder Studio layer for people who are working on Visual Builder. We added 2 new tasks to our visual application build tasks, and they are audit and test tasks. And those basically allow you to run the audit rules and the automated tests on your application as part of your Visual Builder pipeline. Okay, so you have a declarative way to define those steps, and they can then verify the quality of your application. So I'll show you quickly how these things work. Oops, if my session has expired, let me try and relaunch this. All right. Yeah, okay. So this is me working in Oracle SAS. Hopefully you all know that now in Oracle SAS, every Oracle SAS comes with a Visual Builder Studio instance. And over here we have one of our applications that we built. It's in a workspace over here, so I can open this in a new tab. Okay. And our workspace is associated with a Git repository where our code is existing. Okay, and the Git repository also has build steps associated with it. So we have a test and an audit step over here. Okay, so for example, if we look at the last run of the test, okay, if we look at the log here, we can see that it failed, and we can also see, okay, one of one, we executed one test and it failed. If we scroll up a little here, we can see that we did for the input search value action chain action, we ran the check shown test and it failed. Okay, so you can now see why this has failed. Let me show you this test action, or this page. Okay, so it's a simple page where we can search for employees. And over on the input search, we have an event, and the event does a couple of things, and we define the test case for this. So the test case defines what should happen. This is the check shown step. And you can see, even in the design mode, it shows you that this is right now failing. Okay, so if you run it, it would show you whether it's successful or failing. But sometimes people don't bother to run this as part of their design time. They don't run the tests. Okay, so they don't know that this has failed. So let me fix this, because I saw that this failed in our build. So to fix this, I actually need to go to my action chain, and I think I messed up over here. Yeah, I don't like, the expectation wasn't to have this thing at the end. Okay, save. So now, by the way, if I go back to my test over here, and I rerun my test, okay, now it passes. So those are action chain tests. This is a nice way for you to do test-driven development for your declarative actions. If you're not familiar with that, we have blogs with videos that show you how to set those up. We have, of course, documentation. In any case, if you did a change in your code, you can then push it into the Git repository. Okay. Fix for failed test, for example. Okay, so this pushes it back into our Git repository in our project. Okay, if I now go over to my project homepage, you would see in my build, okay, there are two build jobs that have been queued. Okay, one of them is the test, the other one is the audit. They are now queued to run. Now, why did they start running automatically? Let me show you how those steps are defined. So if we go into the configuration of the test job, okay, this is defined as a job that is tied to a merge request. Okay, this is picking up things from the Git repository from a specific branch and automatically would run stuff. And the stuff that it would run here is the visual application test step. So this is, again, one of the steps that we can have here. Actually, let me show you this by creating a new build job just to show you how you would define something like that. So we'll, sorry, not build now, and go back to build and we'll define a new job. Pick a template. So in general, you can define build jobs that map to your Git repository where your application is, and you can pick up the specific build. So this, for example, would run everything on our main branch. And then in the steps here, you now have two new steps in visual application. One of them is the test step, okay, where you can basically define, okay, go over and run tests. By the way, there are two options here, Firefox and Chrome. Firefox is built in. If you want to run it with a Chrome-based tester, you need to run it on a Docker image that has Chrome. So I would suggest just keeping it as Firefox. Then you can define the level of errors you want to get reported and timeout in case there are things that takes time in your application when you're testing it. So all of those can be defined here is in one step, and this would run the automated tests that you define on your test chain. The other thing that you can define here is the audit task. The audit task requires you to map to an environment, specify your username, password, the root of the application and the application version. Then there are a bunch of options that you can define for the audit. We have the default option over here, but you can override. For example, you can enable and disable specific groups of audit rules and things like that. So all of this allows you to define your own tests on your code. Okay. And again, those tests can then run as part of a merge request. So we have a merge request over here. And right now it's running those two build jobs as part of the merge request. And this is the reason that the jobs were started, because we modified the code in the branch that we are trying to merge. It automatically started those, it would run the test and the audit and would verify that those work properly. Let me see, are we progressing here? No, we're still waiting for the, okay, we're waiting for the executor. We're not going to wait for it any longer. So those are, again, two new steps in Visual Builder Studio. Very useful if you want to do test-based development and if you want to verify that your code works according to our standard or your standard. And by the way, one thing to mention about those build jobs, if there are any audit error or test error, this is going to fail. So you can run this either as part of your whole pipeline, if you want to stop, for example, packaging and deploying, and this would fail those. Or if you want to, this can be separate tests that you run without relationship to the pipeline itself. So it won't break the pipeline. Another set of new features are in the Visual Builder add-in for Excel. Again, I'm not sure how many people here are familiar with Visual Builder add-in for Excel. This is basically something that you install in your Excel, an extension to Excel that allows Excels to work with the backends that Visual Builder access. So for example, with business object, also with odds services, and basically give your users an Excel interface to work with your data from the Visual Builder system or from your database. If you're not familiar with this functionality, our next month office hours are going to cover this in much more depth. So make sure to register for those. We'll do a full seminar on introduction to the Excel plugin. In any case, we released version 3.2 several weeks ago, and in that version, there's a bunch of new features, including custom actions for the entire business object, not for specific fields, just dependent layout on odds. So if you have like a master detail kind of parent-child relationship in odds, and you want to build a dependent layout in the Excel spreadsheet, you can do it. A new type of display for list control and a bunch of other improvements. You can read all about those new features in the documentation for Visual Builder add-in for Excel. And again, make sure that you're on the latest release, it's 3.2. Now, this is a product that you install on your Excel. So if you're currently on an older version, make sure that you download the newer version from oracle.com. So those are the main features in the new versions of Visual Builder and Visual Builder Studio. There are a bunch of other features that we added. One of the things we did in this release, one of our focus was to turn Visual Builder Studio to be fully accessible for people with disabilities. So there's a bunch of things that you would notice in the user interface in how Visual Builder Studio behaves. For example, the way that you reorganize steps in a build job has been changed a little bit. All of those are in order to help people with disabilities to leverage our tools and develop applications productively. There's enhancement to some of the aspects of the token-based authentication that we introduced in the previous version, some enhancement over there in terms of sending them emails and things like that. And also a list of the Visual Builder, or a list of the IP addresses that Visual Builder executors need when they fetch software from the outside world. So this is helpful, again, for people who are running our executors inside their virtual cloud network. We also put out a bunch of new technical resources. One of the key things, again, hopefully you're all familiar with the VB Cookbook. That's basically a sample application, shows you a lot of recipes and patterns on how to use all sorts of functionality in Visual Builder, on how to implement all sorts of functionality. One of the things we added in the latest version is the ability to download specific recipes. So up until now, you needed to install the full application, the full cookbook. You got access to all the code, and you could have looked up a specific demo that you were interested in and examining the code and how it was built much more deeply. Now we made it even easier. You can just go to vbcookbook.oracle.com, which is where we're hosting the application. And each demo that you're seeing over there would have a little download button up here on the top right. And this would allow you to basically download just that demo as a standalone application. You then import it into your Visual Builder instance, and you can examine the full code and everything you need in order to implement that specific pattern. So if you're not familiar with the VB Cookbook, just go to this URL, browse through the various samples. There's a lot of useful information in there, and everything is documented step by step to let you know how to use stuff. Another place where we document a lot of things and how to do things is our blogs at blogs.oracle.com/vbcs. There's a bunch of new entries that were added there in the last month. One of them covers how to do pagination on top of a database that is inside the virtual cloud network, how to access the database with Oracle Integration Cloud, and then how to do pagination when you're accessing an Oracle Integration Cloud-based REST service. So it covers a little bit about transform options and how to define those. We have a blog entry that covers how to do a refresh for fragments that are inside the containing page. So how to kind of trigger a refresh event for the fragment. A bunch of entries on App UI, on building extensions to Oracle SAS with App UI. One of them covers how to use custom objects that were defined with App Composer, how to access external REST services if they don't need authentication. Also, it comes with demo. There's a little entry in there with some tips and tricks for select single components. So one of the aspects there is how to cache results for select single in your application so it doesn't go and fetches those every time that you access, and a bunch of other things that can help you better leverage the select single component. So go over and read this one. There's also an entry about how to run automated testings for Visual Builder. What I showed you today in tests are tests for the action chain. The testings that are covered over there is basically user interface based testing. So it's actually running or emulating running your application, testing the UI behavior when people click on stuff. It's very useful. Again, if you want to do test-driven development, this is your entry gate into that part of implementing this. And again, implementing it together with Visual Builder Studio and Visual Builder. If you want to learn more about the new features, if you go to docs.oracle.com, the minute that your instance is getting updated, the documentation gets updated. So we already have the documentation out for the Oracle Integration Cloud and for the Visual Builder Studio. You can read about the new features over there, and then we'll release the ones for the Visual Builder standalone in about a couple of weeks. If you have any questions, we have our Customer Connect forums. You can very easily access it from inside Visual Builder. Go to the menu at the top right. There's a discussion forum. Click on it and you'll get to our forum, and you can ask your questions, technical questions over there. And we also have, of course, our blog, where we have entries about the new stuff. We're going to add more entries about the new functionality in the next coming weeks. And whenever we have a new thing defined, we post it on our LinkedIn group. So this is a great way for you to track what is going on in the Visual Builder ecosystem. It's both us and a bunch of other developers from all around the world sharing information about Visual Builder. If you're not already there, go to LinkedIn, search for Visual Builder, and you can find our group and just join it. And I think that's all we had time for today. One other thing to mention, the Oracle yearly conference is coming back this year. It's in Vegas. It's called Cloud World. We're going to have a bunch of Visual Builder related sessions and hands-on labs over there. So if you get a chance, this would be a great event to join us at. It's Vegas in October. Just Google Oracle Cloud World and see all the content that you can get there, all the events. We'll be happy to see you over there at our demo ground and in our sessions. All right, thanks everyone for joining us today. Let's see if we have any questions. Yeah.
I have one for you, Shai. Can you speak to one of the questions was about the new Redwood components, the Spectra?
Yeah, so the Redwood components. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, let me very quickly touch on the Redwood components. I'll go out from here. If you are using your own Visual Builder, you would find the Redwood components in the component palette. So if you go over here and you'll type Redwood, okay, you would find a lot of components that are the Redwood components. And now, right now, those components are partly released. So you can use them, but the documentation for them is not the full documentation that we plan to have in the future. I'm going to show you, for example, if I pick up one of the templates, let's pick up, actually, maybe there's a lot of templates, as you can see now. Is there the welcome page? Okay, let's install the welcome page over here. So I can install this component in my application. And then if I go over and I create a new page over here, and I'll clear everything else from here. Okay, you would see this component in your component exchange, and you can then just drag and drop it into your page, and this would apply this template to this page. Now, then there's a bunch of properties that you need to set for those templates or component. As I said, right now, it's not the ideal experience if you're using Visual Builder standalone. However, if you are working in Oracle SaaS, okay, and you're creating extensions for Oracle SAS. So if what you're doing here is not a standalone application, but rather an application extension, then the experience is much more organized and working properly. If I go to this project, I think, and I'll open this one. Okay. You would see the experience for App UI. So again, the Redwood components right now are mostly meant to be used when you're building extensions to Oracle SAS and you want the look and feel to be the same as the Oracle SAS look and feel. Okay. And then, for example, if you're creating a new page over here, I'm actually not sure if this would work in this environment right now. You can see all the Redwood components are already built into here. And then, for example, if you bring in the welcome page and drop it over here, you get the welcome template, you get the properties, you can choose your background color to be one of the Oracle Redwood schema colors. You can add, for example, a title for your page. Okay, not two employees, but other employees. You can add a primary action. Okay. Okay, which add a button. So this whole definition is done through properties for our templates and component. And again, there's a bunch of components there. There's, for example, a collection container that you can bring in into the welcome page. Okay. And then again, the collection would have a bunch of properties that you can set for it. Okay. Okay. For example, add an export button, add again, like a bunch of properties over here. Now, each one of the components has a description of how to use it in the component exchange. So if you look up one of your components that is installed and you click on it, you would see the description over there. If you want to learn more about some of those, we have a tutorial that covers this. And we also have the seminar that we did last month on extending Oracle SAS. It covers some of those aspects of using the Redwood component. There's a lot more about the Redwood components that would show up for you around Cloud World. And there's a hands-on lab that we're building specifically for Cloud World that would teach you how to use those. So again, one more reason to come to this big event and join us over there.
Thank you,
All
Shai.
right,
I don't think there are any other questions on there. Thank you.
Yeah, if you have any other questions, again, feel free to post them on the Q&A. You see that we already answered a bunch of those. All right. I
would just be curious, Shai, just quickly, how many people would it be interesting to know of the attendees that are attending Oracle Cloud? Or
yeah, if I don't know, like we can't right now run a
right, you can't do that right now. All right.
Yeah, but again, we would recommend if you can get to Cloud World, this would be a great conference to attend. Again, it's all about Oracle and the stuff that we're doing over there. It's all new things. It's also a peek into the future and what's coming next. It's a great opportunity to meet with product managers and to meet with your peers and talk with them about what they're doing and learn from their experience. And not just in Visual Builder, it's everything in the Oracle ecosystem. So you can learn a bunch of technologies that are related as well. So we are really hoping to see you over there this year. If you can make it, that would be great. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Hopefully you're going to enjoy the new features that we added to Visual Builder. And again, we're looking forward to seeing you over here in next month's seminar about the Excel plugin for Visual Builder. Have a great rest of the day.